And you want to treat your body like it's the thing that you're going to carry you for the rest of your life. I need to look at my, not just my body, but also my training progression and my performance and how long I want to be in this sport. And you can perform the way that you ultimately want to perform, not just get by at treading water and being hurt all the time.
Good Monday morning, Coach.
Good Monday morning. It is July 20th, 2020. Welcome aboard Crushing Iron Podcast 392.
Yep, 392. It's a big number.
It is a big number. And today's a big number for our family. Hayden turns 4 today, which seems like he's so old, man. It's been crazy. But yeah, he's 4 years old. He's getting bigger by the day. I feel like he's grown like 3 inches in the last week and a half. He's incredibly tall for his age. He's always been like in the 90th to like 95th percentile of like height and weight. And so he's just a big dude. You see him. He's one of those guys like you see and you're like, they're just solid. He's just a solid kid in terms of like, he doesn't look like he would weigh that much, but he's heavy. He's a dense fellow, but he is 4 today. He woke up. Yes, he's a dense fellow.
That's got to make you feel good, right?
Yeah, he's just strong. He's a strong, stout little kid, man. He's got a good head on his shoulders. He's got a big head on his shoulders too, but he's got a good head on his shoulders. He gets that from his dad, the big head thing. But yeah, he's a sweet kid. He went to school today. We had a little birthday action this morning when he woke up, and we went in late to school this morning, and we'll do something fun for him after school today. But yeah, the big 4. He got the big 4. I got the big 4-0, and it seems like all is right in the world.
That's so nice, man. Happy birthday, Hayden.
Happy birthday. Yeah, you'll listen to this at some point in your life.
You feel old, dude. I've 2 times in the last 2 days I've been limping around the Y, and they said one of the lifeguards said, "Hey, what's wrong?" I said, "I got plantar fasciitis." And the first one said, "Oh, my grandpa had that. That's really painful." And then the second one I asked, they're like, "Oh yeah, my grandmother had that." And I was like, "Oh boy, I guess this is the old man's disease." I think it.
Did they say, well, that's, I'm sorry to hear you say that, but we do have handicap accessible restrooms downstairs in the lobby.
Oh, I'm getting my share of the old person float around in the deep end with the slippery noodle, whatever that thing is.
Slippery noodle, man. That whole,
we're just floating around talking about the good old days.
That's because in Chattanooga, like the downtown Y that we go to, they've got, which is fantastic. They have 2 separate pools downstairs.
Yeah, awesome.
They got a lap pool, which is just straight up lap swimming, no questions asked, no water jogging, no aerobics, no nothing. It's just straight up swimming. It's what you do. You get in there, you swim. And the other one is the what I think they affectionately call the therapy pool. And I think they've got like one lane. I know they do like swim lessons in there too. I think that's where Hayden goes for swim lessons during daycare. But then they have, it's predominantly senior swim, I think, in there, because I think the water temp in there is like 87. Because how it is. But you know how old people are. It's like you go to the Y and you're like, oh my God, it's like 85 degrees because people in that age bracket tend to want their they want their water a little bit warmer than others. They might be hanging out there and hanging out. So, but hey, in my opinion, you're definitely not that old. You probably haven't even peaked yet. So, hey, you can tell the people who are giving you a hard time to just stay patient, kick back, relax, and watch you negative split this year, hopefully like the rest of us, and then watch out for 2021.
Yeah, I'm feeling, dude. I do think that the running in the water has really helped my plantar fasciitis a lot. Like it's kind of got in my head right now where I'm like, okay, I can feel that foot rounding out a little bit and strengthening up, and I am cautiously optimistic that I'm on the correct road right now. So like I've been dealing with this for about 3 months right now. In the last week, I've seen the most results I have the whole time. So, but I do feel like we have an old podcast called Slow Burn, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that I'm about a good month away from trying to run again at this pace. So I'm just taking it slow and looking forward to that day and running, and hopefully I'm better balance and stronger in my feet and maybe more flexible by then. And I'm, like you said, I'm hoping it's a negative split of the year and
I
then
mean,
moving forward.
now is not the time to rush back from a niggle or an injury or something that you feel like could be addressed and put you on like the path to ultimate like healing and recovery and being back and totally healthy. Like there is no reason to rush things right now except for the fact of your just mere and utter lack of patience. I mean, that's just that there is no reason like, to risk having continued setbacks after setbacks and kind of riding that. And a lot of athletes do that. They ride that roller coaster of they're always hurt. They're never healthy. Like I think we all know athletes like that, or maybe even if you're listening, you've been through that at some point in your life in terms of you were hurt the whole year. You were never healthy. You were never totally injured. You were just kind of hurt. You just did just enough to keep yourself able to whether it was getting like cortisone injections or taking a couple of days off here and then going back and you never made really forward progress. You just kind of treaded water all year. And while that might seem like a short term fix or something that might be good for you, we were just talking a minute ago, since you're at my house right now, we're recording, is like I was talking about like the roller coaster, kind of like the stock market graphic that so many people choose to approach their training with. It is there's those up, then there's a huge down, there's a huge up, and there's a couple downs, and then maybe it's a little more erratic here and there, then like a big drop and a big up. Like you always want that trend to continue to go up, and there's nothing wrong with flatlining, but at some point if you're flatlining that trend and that fitness curve to the extent of just kind of hanging on by a thread and trying not to be totally on the shelf, at some point you're going to hit the shelf. And then when you do, it's going to be for a much longer period of time. And then the road back is going to take you that much longer. When so many athletes, like, man, I think if you've been in the sport long enough, everyone's had some kind of an injury where you've said, all right, I just need to take a step back and address this. I think the worst period I had was when was having these like incredibly painful Achilles tendonitis where it was ruining me. I was unable to I couldn't run like a mile or two, and I was getting dry needling done on my calf and my Achilles, which is in my opinion like one of the best things you can do for it. But that was just me personally, incredibly painful but very useful. My calves were super tight. It actually stemmed from, which I think a lot of running injuries actually do in multisport, actually stemmed from poor bike fit, in terms of where my cleat positioning was. But I took time off. I didn't rush things. I actually ended up, I think I mentioned this before in the podcast, is actually ended up taking so much time off running and then going back into it. I actually ended up having that year some of my best marathon or the best half marathon splits.
Interesting. Yeah.
In terms of just I biked a ton, I swam a ton, um, and just stayed patient with it. I ended up doing that was the year I did a negative split on the country music marathon, and I had my best half marathon split at 70.3 in Gulf Coast this year after 2 weeks after that marathon with only like 4 runs in 2.5, 3 months. I just did a lot of big gear work and a ton of cycling. And I was obviously really fresh, but there's no reason to rush right now, especially if you know for a fact you don't have races coming up. Treat your body the way that needs to be treated. Be patient with it. Just look at it as a process oriented escape for this year that's not revolving around a race, but that's revolving around your body.
Mm-hmm. Man, that's so interesting to think that, you can come back and run better without running a lot. And like, I think it's so, if I was really observant, I think I would have noticed this problem coming on, but I kind of, sort of looked the other way on it. And it's just for an example, like with my plantar fasciitis on my left foot, if I get into like, like what it would be a catcher's crouch kind of
Mm-hmm.
situation and try to have my heels both on the ground, I still notice that my left heel doesn't naturally is up in the air a little bit. So there's like a subtle little problem that you may not want to pay attention to, but I think those are things that maybe we can look at along the way and just keep an eye on them because I mean, you know what I mean? I feel like this thing snuck up on me, but I'm sure that it was something I've been kind of dealing with in the background, and finally it just kind of snapped at one day on a longer run. But I do think that I really feel like that I've always felt like that. That's why I always say even like Now, it's interesting with yoga for in me because like yoga kind of irritated it. I was trying to use yoga as a comeback routine and it was really irritating it. But I do think the power strength moves in yoga are a really good complement to running. And I've always said that even when I'm in a good groove with yoga and I'm cycling a lot and I'm swimming a lot on the other side, that my running is really strong, even though I'm not maybe running as many miles as I need to be. But isn't that interesting that I mean, you have to learn, you have to run a lot, obviously, because you have to be able to take the pounding and you have to be able to, have your frame in that kind of shape. But there is something to be said for maybe backing that down a little bit. And it's certainly when you're hurt or, feeling some pain. I mean, there's no, I guess what I'm getting at is that there's really, you don't lose that running as fast as you think, I think, if you're doing the other things.
Well, I mean, and yeah, I mean, let's be honest. There's no bigger proponent of running frequency and running a lot than me. I mean, I'm definitely not going to sit here and say that running less is the remedy for running faster. That's not what I believe by any stretch of imagination. But kind of going back to what we discussed in the last couple podcasts is that fitness is cumulative. It takes time to build, but it also takes time to go away. Like I've been in the sport for 15 years. Like I could, I rode again this last Friday, and I feel like I rode for an hour and 20 with some pretty good hard intervals in there. And I feel like I could have gone for like 2 hours. Like I feel like if I was outside on the road, I probably could have cruised on a nice rolling 40-mile course. Having not ridden my bike more than 3 times in the last 8 months. That's not because I'm some natural athlete by any means. It's just because I've been doing this sport for so long that it's just in there and it doesn't just go away even over months, especially when you're still active doing some kind of a sport. I've been running a ton, so it's not like, you know, when I'm running for the last 8 months, my body's like, all right, you're running a lot, but here's what we're going to do. We're only going to allocate these hours and this intensity distribution and this amount of time you spend at aerobic base. We're only going to allocate that for your running specific sessions. When you get on the bike, it's going to be like you can't pedal. And that's not how the body works. And so I'm not obviously a proponent of running less, but at the same time, if you have like a huge base and you also know that you can bike and you can swim while taking time off running, then take time off. Like it's not going to go away because there are very, very, very few running injuries. Obviously, like outside of very severe breaks, but even then, like you can get back to cycling and swimming fairly quickly. Like you can still do things to keep fitness there, to get better at cycling, to get better at swimming, while also kind of help maintain or even just kind of limit the loss you might have in running. Obviously, the biggest thing you might lose with running is the durability standpoint. You might lose some of the bone density, you might lose some of the ability to your form not to break down over long periods of time, but you just have to be smart about it, and you have to kind of like measure and weigh things out. It's like, all right, do I really just want to keep being that person who just stays hurt all the time? Just because I can't let go. I can't not train. I can't do this. And it would be devastating to me to have to take a significant time off because all you're doing is just delaying the inevitable. Because at some point, you're going to have to do it. You're either going to have to take time off and do rigorous PT and take time off running. You're going to have to go under the knife. You're going to have to do this. You're going to have to take the time off. And in the meantime, are you really are you even going to be capable of getting better or performing at your best? I'm going to say no, because you can't. If you're not totally healthy and you don't have the availability, like that's one of the biggest predictors of success and performance in reaching your potential is training availability. Like, do you have the time, the availability to train? In order to do that, you have to be healthy. You can't
Hmm.
take a week or two here and then a week or two off. I mean, I know athletes like this. I work with some. I'm like, listen, just let's do it. Let's do what we need to do now. Let's get it fixed, especially right now. Like so many people have been given, you know, not a free pass, but you've had these races removed and the pressure of that and the decision making has been kind of lightened to say, hey, you know what? Let me just get healthy. Like, what's the point? And also like the point is if you're doing this to make your body feel good and to be healthier and to be fitter and to, increase aspects of your life that are, you want to increase through physical activity, you want to do that in a healthy way. And you want to treat your body like it's the thing that you're going to carry you for the rest of your life. Like, yes, you're not playing in the NFL. You're not a running back who has to retire at 32 because you're getting, absolutely just, smashed and you're going to have arthritis and you're going to be able to walk for the next 30 years. But to some extent, like you still have to treat your body in terms of like, this is the only body that I've been given. This is it. I don't get another one. I don't get a free pass, and maybe in like 30 years we can probably get like new bodies. But until then, we just kind of got what we got, and you have to treat that with respect. And you have to treat it with care, and you have to be patient with it and understand that I need to look at my not just my body, but also my training progression and my performance and how long I want to be in this sport in a way that's patient and precise and purposeful, so you can do what you need to do in either short periods or long periods to make sure that down the road you're still able to do this sport. You can do it in a healthy way, and you can perform the way that you ultimately want to perform, not just get by at treading water and being hurt all the time. Bite the bullet. Just bite the bullet.
Bite the bullet and take care of yourself. Yeah. That's I mean, this sport is interesting in that regard because, it is a cross-trained sport, and then there's opportunities to even cross-train those other, sports within the sport. So I you think about when you're a kid, it's interesting because when I was a kid, obviously I was playing different sports almost on a daily basis and just, mixing up the muscle usage and running around with football or basketball or baseball, and I start thinking about, man, what if I just played baseball? Like, a lot of kids today do. It seems like they're focused on one sport, and how that could be such a grind. If all I did was swing the bat right-handed for every day of the year, like how out of balance that would probably put me if I wasn't taking care of things like, working the core, the opposite direction and things like that. So I just look at this as a great opportunity for, if it is running, in my case, it's been running. And I feel like, I don't know and I don't really even honestly care what the translation is between pool running or aqua jogging. Is there a competition for aqua jogging? Because I'm getting pretty good at it.
I don't know
But
that there is currently. You never know,
I,
though. I mean, it
I
might
might
be the
invent it.
Olympics in 4 years.
Yeah, I may like try to organize it, but I definitely think like what I'm doing in the pool is certainly going to help my running. You know what I mean? It's if nothing else from like strengthening the hip flexors and things of that nature. And I feel like, I mean, I would imagine that, and it just seems to me like it's really kind of getting at my feet and balancing, because you're running, you're moving water around. It's kind of like a pseudo trail running adventure in the sense of it's hard to balance, it's your feet aren't hitting the same place and they're kind of moving around as you push down and things like that. So I really like that. I really like what's going on there. And so, to me, that's like another usage of, or a supplement for running, is just running in the pool. And I know that, I don't know how many people do that actually, because it's super boring and everything like that. But if you can find a groove with it, I certainly feel like I'm not wasting my time, you know?
Well, I mean, what you're doing is kind of like the happy medium, right? It's like the equivalent
Hmm.
of biking and swimming a ton while you can't run. Like you're not doing anything that's going to damage or set yourself back a few days or a few weeks or a few months. You're being smart in doing what you can to either stay fit, get fitter, while at the same time also getting healthy. And that's like the delicate balance that so many athletes struggle with, is that they really can't decide, or they just simply can't let go. They feel like an impulse to just do it. Like and a lot of it stems from just either a very, very bad relationship with a specific sport. It's just been something that they feel like they have to do, or this part of them is being taken away. And then if that's taken away, they won't have their identity. And this is the only sport that I can do that's really going to relieve my stress. And that, I don't want to fall behind. I don't want to get, I've got these goals and I have to do this, I have to do that. And so they make these big mistakes and end up paying for them in the long run. Or even like for most athletes, I think everyone has gone through this. It's like you have some kind of a niggle or like a slight pain that you just ignore. And you're like, that's going to go away. It's going to go away. I can just run through it. Like, who has ever ran through something and been like, you know what? That was a good idea. I'm really glad that I decided to run through that pain, because that's not usually how running works, because running is such a like it's put such a pounding on your body that you don't get free passes. That's also why so many people who have really, really poor bike fits find out that they have that via the run, not the bike. Because on the bike you can get away with mistakes because there's no pounding, it's no impact. You're suspended on your bike and it's no impact. But if there's any kind of an imbalance, or your hip is closed too much, which is another common one, or your cleats are too far forward or too far backwards, or too in or too out, and you have these things that pop up in your calves, your Achilles, or your feet, you might not feel them on the bike because again, it's no impact. But then you get off and run like 2 miles, and you're like, oh my God, I can't run. Like, this is a running injury. No, like you have to be very specific about, not specific, but you have to kind of really dig into the details about really why are you hurt. Go back. It's in it because it's rarely the absolute. You can rarely trace it back to one specific event. Obviously, if it's a huge injury, it might be like some obvious like traumatic event, like you had a bike wreck. Yes, that would be a fairly easy one. But in terms of like one that's kind of like drastically and slowly gotten worse, you won't really know because if you elongate that period, you'll never be able to trace it back. But what you can do is you can look at everything in terms of like what you actually do with your training. Was it, you know, did my run hurt immediately after a certain type of ride? And if I did, was I in air position? Was I not in air position? Was it a high threshold ride? Was it not a high threshold ride? Was it the longest I've done this kind of a ride outside? Was it I just got a new bike fit? Like you have to look at everything, kind of like, and I say this in injury wise, the same the same way I think running gets a bad rap in racing. I need to run more. I just need to run more. My run's just not where it needs to be. When for the most part, the run takes the blame because it's last and your fatigue is built up so much over time over the course of the day, whether you outswam or you outbiked your potential or your ability to perform, it shows up on the run because it is last. And that's the same thing with so many injuries that can be niggles, it can be slight pains or slight things that might keep you in and out of running. Not I'm not saying a lot of it, but many times it comes from biking. It comes from just poor bike fits. Like there have been many times I've just had an athlete send me a video of them on the bike when they've had like nagging, especially like hip flexors. It's almost always that they have a really poor bike fit and their hip angle is just incredibly closed. And so they can get away with on the bike. It might be a little bit tight, but when they go run, it pulls on it and they're done. Same thing for a lot of times with patella injuries or things that their knee is sore. You think, okay, well, look at your knee trajectory and angle when it is when you're pedaling on your bike. If you're doing big gear work or really mashing on the gears, you're standing up out of the saddle. Is your knee pointed way out or is it pointed way in? And then let's look back and think, all right, how is it going to impact how you feel when you're running? Like there's just so many things, and that's also why triathlon is so complicated, but also so wonderful and so complex. Is that it's rarely just 1+1. It's like, oh well, today's run hurt, so it has to be running. It's usually 1+1+4 -3+2 divided by 6 equals, well, this actually may have occurred when I was on my bike ride and I want to be a little more aero, took out my Allen wrench and lowered my seat a little bit, and then I ended up climbing more than I've climbed in a day, and now my knees sore and show up on my run, so it's not running. It was that day I decided to tweak with my, which is like something you never want to see, but see all the time, is a triathlete hopping off their bike, adjusting their seat angle on the fly, because you can't just. No, it's the worst because what people don't understand is that you can't just do that. Like I know, yes, well, I mean, in the freedom of this country, yes, you can. But in terms of like how it impacts your bike fit, it impacts it significantly because when you adjust anything, and I'm going way off here, when you adjust anything on your bike, it's again not a 1+1. It has to be complemented by a change up front or somewhere else on the bike. It's not just lowering the saddle because when the way that your body is positioned, especially if it's on a tri bike with your arms at a certain angle, your hip out is now at a certain angle. Your downstroke where your heel is at 6 o'clock is now at a different angle. It's all connected. It's not just down. It has to also be fore and aft on your saddle. But Travis, like, I'm just lower my saddle just to tweak, and that's like a big deal. Or I'm gonna raise a little bit. That's not a big deal. It is, and like I know that doesn't make sense, and it might seem totally insignificant, and I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, but it happens all the time. And so many times we can trace that back to new shoes or new fancy cleats or, new things on my bike and a new fit. And you're like, all right, well, let's go back and let's find like the most common sense common denominator. And it is usually poor decision making, or, oh, that makes sense because I was on my bike too long this day on a fit that I just kind of, I went to Colorado and rented a bike for 2 weeks that it was a crappy fit. And now I come back and I can't run my knees sore. Is it really my running? No, it was probably a poor bike fit. So it's just it's complex. You just have to like troubleshoot and kind of triage your way through what's really the cause of it, and then hopefully do your best to address it.
I actually think that's a really important point to get through because there's been over the years many times you've told me or you've talked about this very issue and it doesn't always sink in. And now that we're talking about it again and thinking about it in terms of like my firsthand experience with this injury right now, I start thinking about things like, oh, okay, so let's just say that our feet on the pedals should be flat, hypothetically. I mean, well, they should, but like, perfectly flat. But what if the my left foot is tight, so I'm kind of pointing my toe just a little bit more, and then over thousands and thousands and thousands of rotations, I'm shrinking and tightening that calf muscle through the Achilles and through the heel and all that sort of thing. But it's not, it's just like a fraction. But over time, that kind of thing, it may take 2 years. You know what I mean? That's why when you're saying this, it's like, it's so important to think about maybe getting more bike fits. For me specifically, is that like things change, right? And there's no doubt in my mind that I've changed shoes, and I've kind of readjusted my cleat on my own and those types of things, and like taking out shims and you know what I mean? Like I'm moving, taking cleats and changing them out and moving the shims, and like things are getting off, and who knows what happened, right? And that could very well have been the deal where over time it just kept hammering, it just kept like tweaking and tweaking and tweaking, and then finally it just was like, all right, we gave out. And if I'm honest, I probably should have noticed that too on my run because, like I said, when I looked at my shoes at one time, my wear spots were more on my toe on my left side, which means to me that I was not getting down and I was babying my Achilles and all that sort of stuff. So it was like tightening, and that's really explaining what I was saying about the catcher's crouch is I can't flatten out because it's too tight in there, or shortened, or whatever you want to call it. And that's just when you think about bike fits, it's like, wow, man, those little things, because that's the whole thing, right? Is like if you do this, whatever you're doing over and over, because we do, running, how many strides and pedaling, and like it may, and especially on a bike, it seems so easy, like you're saying, just to not even really pay attention to it because you can get through it because it's not like pain, and then you just sort of compensate. And I think compensation is the word. It's like, are you compensating at all on anything? That's something you need to probably take a look at.
That's such a huge thing that people again underestimate is that, we talk about, I always talk about cumulative fitness over time or cumulative fatigue, and people think about fatigue as in like, oh, my body's just getting tired, or I'm in this huge training block, and of course my numbers might not be the same, or I might not be able to, hashtag beat yesterday, but it's cumulative fatigue. The same thing goes with mechanics, with on, while you're cycling, while you're running, even when you're swimming. Like when you do something for so long and it's out of whack and out of balance, at some point it's going to really show up. Like if someone builds a building wrong and they engineered it incorrectly, and it'll look perfect to start, but then after years and years and years the cracks will show, and then at some point they're going to have to do some major reconstruction and think, all right, we actually have to evacuate this building and basically rebuild it because there were just a few things that were wrong from the start within the foundation that have now caused these to happen and these beams to break or these things to become out of place, and now it's actually dangerous. The same thing goes with your body. Like the smallest things add up over time. It's never, like I said before, it's rarely ever, unless it's like an obvious traumatic event, like it's like a bike crash or you step off a curb and break your ankle. Those are obviously one time instances. You can be like, all right, I can trace it back to that. But for the most part, like niggles and things that it kind of you might think just pop up, like the same way we discuss fitness as in, if you're being super consistent and you're doing it for a long period of time, then one day you're just going to go out and run. You're going to be like, I have no idea who that was. It was incredible. I've never been that fast in my entire life. It doesn't happen overnight. The same thing goes with like niggles that turn into injuries or things that are chronic. Like they don't happen overnight. They happen over time. And there are so many times where we either ignore the signs or we bypass opportunities to address them by being specific and detail oriented. And I can tell you this from personal experience and as a coach who's worked with hundreds and hundreds of athletes, that a correct and proper bike fit is one of the most important things you will ever get, not just for the bike but also for the run. And at the same time, I can also tell you I have had more athletes get hurt from trying to change up their run form and run cadence than I have by ever changing shoes and ever running too much. it's about changing. And I'm just saying, like, in terms of when I talk about athletes changing their run mechanics, especially if you've been running for a long period of time, or if you're someone who might not be like super lean and light, then you take all of this load that has been dispersed over a specific run cadence or run stride where your muscles are either stronger and weaker in certain areas, and all of a sudden you want to change that up. It's like, it's like you're tilting the weight on the scale to a totally different direction that it's been accustomed to, and all of a sudden it's just going to go out of whack and it's going to fall. That's what happens when people try to change things just like overnight. Everything has to be a process, even when it comes to healing it or fixing it. It is a process. It might not be super comfortable to start. That's why a lot of athletes tend to not address bike fits, is that a lot of it takes time. Like I think when we had Starkey on, what, a year and a half ago, maybe longer than that, he was talking about on the bike, like I think he does like neck exercises on his bike. I think
Yeah,
he even
that's
mentioned
right.
that he was doing, like, he does neck strengthening exercises because he wants his neck to be in this perfect position to be able to maintain it so it doesn't give him cramps, and that he can stay as low as he needs to be. Obviously, he's a professional, he's incredibly detail oriented, this is important to him, but we could all take, that as an example of how we need to think about, like, everything matters. You can't just, this looks about right, this probably will be fine. And yes, it might be fine for like a day on a low impact, non-significant flat ride where you're just cruising with your buddies on a beach cruiser in Hilton Head with, living the dream. But if you're out on your bike and like, what, I think I'm gonna, try to make myself more aero today, and you drop your seat and you're like, yeah, this feels pretty good, and it ends up actually, because if you think about it, if you're lowering your saddle, not changing anything out, not changing on your crank length, saddle fore and aft, you're not just changing your hip angle, you're creating a different contact point for where your foot is. So now the revolutions in your knee angle is going to be different. Your knee could now be either, pointed out or pointed in, because it's got to either make up for the different in distance that it's usually accustomed to when being attached, from your butt on the seat to the pedal. So now you're going to go smash some hills while your knee is pointed like bow-legged straight in or out. You don't think it's going to impact things negatively? It's just, and I know that, like, we are in most of our podcasts are like, yeah, it's we try to give general the ideas that are, positive and things you can take to you, but like there are things, and the sport is very detail oriented, and it rewards those who don't just have a lackadaisical attitude towards getting the most out of what they want to get out of, and that's their body. In order to do that, when you think about the sport and all the disciplines that it requires in swim, bike, run, nutrition, transitions, everything, like preparation. There are so many moving parts. If you look at like any kind of machinery, or like you undo the back off a really, really nice watch, and you just mess with one of the little wheels that turns, it's going to stop telling time. All the other ones might work perfectly, but if you mess up one, you mess up all. And that is the same thing in terms of how we should look at triathlon, how you should look at, making sure you're healthy and stable and creating a durable frame, and you want to be in the sport for a long period of time, is you have to pay attention to those details, not just your obsessed data-driven metrics when you get done with your run, like, oh, well, my PAHR was really smooth today, it was excellent, but when it comes to like bike fit and, paying attention to all the details that you should be paying attention to, what's the big deal? It's fine. You know what? I'm going to do more research on my $485 aero helmet with this metallic super carbon mask, and then purchase that than I'm ever going to do on making sure that my bike fit or anything I'm doing, my swim mechanics or anything else is like, what's the big deal? I'll just spend another $800 on a new Roku wetsuit with some complimentary shades and call it a day.
Ah, man, what a great point. Um, so in my dealings with plantar fasciitis, I've been researching a lot of things, and what you were talking about just then made me think of, the small little things like I was looking into sleep actually, and like more specifically the position of sleeping, and I was reading a bunch of stuff on this, and it just really sunk into me that I'm typically sort of a stomach sleeper, so that means that I kind of crank my head when I'm laying on the pillow. And I got in the article, it said, think about if you sat at your desk all day with your head completely turned to the right for 8 hours, how your neck would feel the next, after that. And it makes so much sense to think about, because one of the things I was interested in with stomach, I started investigating this idea that, like, I always have hamstring issues, right? So I was thinking, sleeping on my stomach, is that like a 8 hour like shortening of your hamstrings? And then when you get up, And because that's what happens to me a lot is I get up in the morning and my hamstrings are super tight. And it just got me curious because it's like if you sleep, it doesn't, I mean, like we have to sleep some way. We have, either on our back or side or stomach. But I'm just trying to think about it and want people to think about it in a way of like, oh, if you sleep on your back all the time, does that like shrink, you know, lengthening your back muscles and maybe shrinking your core stuff? I just think it's worth paying attention to, maybe as like a preventative or when you get up in the morning, maybe it's a good idea to kind of spend some time maybe opening your chest or your core or something like that, like or whatever the counter move is to how you just slept all night for 8 hours. Because I mean, aside from the fact that good sleep is the best way to heal anything and restore anything in your body, I think it's worth kind of thinking about what you're doing and how you're in that position for so long, and then maybe doing some kind of counterbalance when you get up in the morning.
It 100% does matter because I know there's actually like I don't want to call it a contraption, but it's a rehabilitation tool that I guess people use when they have plantar fasciitis, where it basically they're called something, I don't know what they're called. And if we ever choose to like outline a bullet points where we're going to go to podcast, we'll do our research, but we don't do that today. Where it makes your it brings your toes up towards your ankle and keeps them like there when you sleep, to help, for whatever reason, but to help you feel better. But I know this specifically in terms of like just how your ankles are when you're at night. I think it's recommended that you like sleep on your side with like a pillow in between your knees or whatever. And I think that's like the so-called best way to sleep. I sleep straight up on my stomach with no pillow. Like I have a pillow, but like my head's barely on it.
Yeah.
So my feet, if I'm doing that and I'm on my stomach, my feet obviously have to be pointed down. And so I
Hmm.
think I think it does matter in terms of like if your ankles are plantar flexed or dorsiflexed. Like there is a huge difference in how that might accumulate over time and how you might feel. I'm definitely not in the business trying to change the way that I sleep because I sleep on money on my stomach. But it's just an interesting, I think, topic and conversation to address. I'm obviously not a sleep expert by any stretch in terms on the yoga meditative stretches and perfect ways to sleep, but it's a small example of how basically everything you do 24 hours a day is related. Like to the other extent that I have this conversation with athletes who sit a lot or stand and walk a lot. Like especially for athletes who are very negligent on foam rolling or stretching or doing whatever they need to do, that they might do like a really really hard trainer session. They're in an aero position, they're mashing out intervals. They hop off their bike, they cool down, because a lot of people are super busy, especially if they have to get in their car and go to work. They're time crunched already. They hop off their bike, take a quick shower, grab food, grab a shake, grab in the car and go. And for some people, they drive either all day long to go to like sales meetings or do whatever, or they're just on the road, that's their job, or they drive to work, hop in the elevator, go up, and then they go, and what do? They sit for the entire day. They don't have a standing desk. They just sit. Again, with their hip angle closed. And then they get up the next day and they go to run. They're like, my hip flexors are super tight. It's got to be something. Something's up with my running. And a lot of times my question is, all right, well, let me see your hip angle on your bike, and then have you been sitting more than normal? Because sitting is like, and this is like one of my other like, I'm not going to go off on that rant about like how many more people are sitting right now because they've been like shut in inside. Is that sitting is like death. It's not that dramatic, but
Ooh.
it is in a lot of ways. Just sitting and being sedentary is so awful for you that, I mean, for most people, if they could just get up and do a brisk walk for an hour a day, they'd be significantly healthier. But for athletes who just train hard and do a lot of interval work or do whatever, and then they just sit all day long, it impacts you negatively. Same thing goes for people who I'm like, listen, if you were going on like a long drive, don't expect to feel awesome the next day. Because yes, I think you'll be like emotionally and mentally tired, but the same thing, your body's going to be like, what? You just forced me to sit basically still with my ankles doing this and that for basically 8, 10 hours, however long your drive was. It's going to impact you negatively. Like there's just a lot of things you have to think about. Or for athletes who are maybe doing higher run volume or doing a ton of riding, and then they go to work and they're like, I was on my feet all day today, like they work in a hospital or whatever it is, and they like, have, maybe they wore their flats. Like I'll have athletes, especially females, who because they can't get away with just wearing like flip flops and some old school Adidas to work like some dudes can. They have to wear like high heels or flats, and this impacts them negatively in a lot of ways, and how their body's recovering, or they're having how their ankle is flexed one way or the other, how it's stretching their calf, or how it's flexing it. Like, there are a lot of things that we just don't think about in terms of the cumulative effect of a 24-hour day, whether it's how we sleep, whether it's how much we sleep, whether it's how was our bike fit and our bike session, did we run hills today, or the hills we run, were those too steep, was the incline too great. That's something that another thing that athletes really like, because the triathlete mindset is, if I'm running hills, steeper is better. If I'm going to get the adaptation, I'm going to go for like 12 to 18%. And in fact, I'm going to fly over to the Pyrenees and Tour de France, and I'm going to do them over there. Like, and I tell athletes, if you want like 4 to 6%, maybe 8 max. Outside of that, you're not even going to run in like the same run form that you're going to, like, in terms of like establishing a really good run economy. Like, you're overdoing a certain part of your muscular system that's not conducive to making things even and making you feel like you're actual running. You're just basically like slow jogging uphill and putting all of the load, all of it, on like your calves and your Achilles, if it's that steep. You want it to where you can actually run it, and run it hard, and run it fast at a higher cadence. But a lot of athletes are like, I'm going to choose a really, really steep hill, and I'm going to do this. And the next, like, my hips are hurting, my quads are hurting, my patellas are hurting, my knees are hurting. Okay, well, your knees are hurting. Let's go back and let's look at the train you ran. Oh, you had a ton of downhills that day. Oh, well, that also makes sense. We need to work on your quad strength because your quads protect your knees. Like, and I know this is probably super overwhelming for a lot of athletes, because you're thinking, man, there is way too much of the sport that I need to like be paying attention to. But in order to get the best out of yourself, and the time and the money that you invest in trying to get better, and trying to be a part of a process that gets you to this specific end result, there are just certain, and especially if you love this sport, you want to be in it for a long time. And there are just things you're going to have to adapt to. You're going to have to take your time to be patient with. And patience is the greatest characteristic you can have if you're coming back from an injury. Yeah, I work with an athlete who had a stress fracture earlier this year, and they were insanely patient. And most of you know, if you listen to this podcast for, I was like, I'm always like, let's just wait an extra week. A doctor might say, all right, well, we're good to go next week. I'm like, all right, let's make it another week. Doctors are smart. They're smarter than me, but in my opinion, they're not perfect. And so, what's one more week? If we've taken 16 weeks off, what's 17 weeks? Are you gonna get to race
Right.
day and be like, you know what?
Yeah.
I would have had it today, man, but it was that one extra week. It got me. I just couldn't put the pedal to the metal, man. It just got me. No. What you're more than likely going to say is, well, you know what? I can't race today because I came back from injury too early. I'm injured again, and I got back in a boot. Like, that's what most people say. That's what happens. Take the extra week, and this athlete took the extra time. And right now, even with no races on the agenda and in the cards, they are without question in the best shape they've ever been in, running, cycling, and swimming wise. You just have to have that patience. You have to understand, and you also have to understand, again, that how your body works and how physiology works, and that just because you're not running and you can still bike and swim, or just because you're not biking, you can still swim and run, or any combination, you're still getting fitter. It's not specific, but your overall fitness is increasing. Again, like, it doesn't go down to like the compartments that are, your body has a swim compartment, a bike compartment, and a run compartment. Every time you go out for your training peaks, like, I'm swimming today, your body turns on the swim compartment and nothing else transfers. There's no bleeding in, or the paint doesn't, go into the other. It's like to make different colors. It's like it's all the same. Like, you get the benefits. Yes, there are specifics you have to go through, but everything is cumulative. Like we said, cumulative fatigue, cumulative fitness, cumulative impact on injuries and niggles or imbalances in your body that you don't address, that you've probably been told you should address. Because what usually happens is, you have a your knee is sore, your IT band is this, or not, your glutes aren't firing, or your shoulders, hinged here, and your doc's like, you know what, you most certainly don't need surgery, and really, you don't even need anything else. You don't even know, you don't even know, you don't even need to go to PT. Here's this print off sheet of 6 exercises you could do on your own at home and be done with it. And in probably 8 to 10 weeks, be fine. What happens is for the most athletes, they take a couple weeks off of an easy rest, and they're like, "See, I feel great, right? I feel fine. I don't need these stretches." Or what also happens is that an athlete gets better by doing said stretches or doing said PT or doing said foam rolling. They get back to feeling 100%, and then what do? They forget how they got.
Stop.
They stop.
Yeah.
They're like, "Oh, I'm healthy again, baby. I'm back." And then they just degrade and degrade and degrade and degrade back to whence they came. And then they just repeat the cycle over and over and over again. It happens every year to so many people. I'm sure there are plenty of people in this podcast that are like shaking their heads like, "Yep, that's me. Yep, totally, that's me, coach." It doesn't have to be
Mm,
you, or it can only be you one time. You just have to stick with it. And I get it, because the foam rolling, the maintenance, the work that matters, the bike fits, like none of that stuff is post worthy. That's fun to show. It's nothing goes in your training peak stat. It's like, oh, dude, killed it today. None of it is. It's nothing fancy, it's something shiny, but it's in the details. The details matter, and they're what allow you to do the things that are bigger and greater better.
hmm Boy, patience, man. That is like, over the years, you witness like people like Tiger Woods or one of my favorite drummers, Neil Peart. These guys like do their thing, right? And they're the greatest in the world. And then all of a sudden they decide they're hurt and they can't keep it up. I mean, how many surgeries Tiger Woods have and Neil Peart had all this kind of stuff too. And so suddenly they decide they're going to change their form and or there's their rhythms and things like that, and they go backwards because it's hard. It's not easy to change the way you do something, and then they kind of get it back up, but then they realize, man, I feel good again, so I'm going to go back sort of to how I was, and then it creates the same problems, and then you got to learn it again, and sometimes that's a hard thing to learn over time, and it's like I I'm dealing with this injury, right? And you're talking about like sitting and how we sit for 8 hours a day or in the car. I mean, like, tell me, what's the worst feeling? It's doing a race and then driving like 8 hours the next day, and then
Oh
when you
God.
get out of the car. I mean, that ought to tell you right there that something. I mean, that's sort of amplified, the sitting issue, but like sometimes it's like because we sit in chairs, right? It's just this comfort zone, and like I've done research on stuff like this, and I see people that suggest like sitting on the ground and things like that because it forces you to put yourself in different positions,
Hmm.
and it's more of a natural thing of rather than sitting at a desk and how we're leaning in closer and looking at computers and that's just sort of stretching your back, your spinal cord, and then but like contracting everything in front of you. And but you got to look at that because like that's all of a sudden you're tightening up your the big buzzword is the psoas muscle now, and it's like it's causing so many little problems over time that you have to look at that. And I mean, you're absolutely right. It's like it's so hard to have patience with that stuff because the minute you start feeling good again, you're like, all right, I got it back, and you just kind of go back to what you were, and you know invariably it's going to pop up again probably. So that's that. It's I really love what you said because I think a lot of triathletes do deal with constant pain and chronic injury and things like that. And again, I just uh, can't say it enough, but I feel like this year and this time right now is that time to dive into that and really let's get it right and come back next year with you don't have to live with that pain most of the time, I think. And I'm learning the hard way. Like I said, I feel like I'm 20%, and it's really interesting because it's almost like there's like a health meter going on in my foot right now. It's like you can kind of tell, but sometimes you don't even notice that either, right? Like that's the other thing I like to say is pay attention to that because I I'm it's easy not to notice when something's not hurting, right? Like I'm getting up and I'm walking around and then I'm like I forget that I have it for once in a while and I'm like no, you still have it. Keep working at it. Keep kind of working it out because every once in a while too it'll shoot a sharp pain in there, and that doesn't mean you're like 100% hurt again. It's just like that's the process, I think. Like sometimes these injuries, just that healing process, it has to kind of remind you. It's like, hey, I'm still here. Don't give up on these things you're doing to make me feel better.
It's like so many, and I probably use this analogy like way too much in terms of on the podcast, but recovery, like from being alcoholic like I'm in, like in the last 7 years, like you don't just
Mm,
forget what got you here. It's like, and
that's a
that's what,
great
and
analogy.
that's what happens. That's what happens, like with injuries, because it's a traumatic event or something that's happened to your body. It takes, you have to heal it, you have to fix it, and once you find that method that gets you to where you need to be, you can't just be like, okay, I'm here now, I'm fine, and I'm done. It's never really over. Like you're never just, I know they say like, one day at a time, that's how you get there, but like even when you've been in it for a long period of time, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, you only get to be 25, 30 years sober by doing the same things you did on day one and day two and day three when it seemed important and vital and for most of us life or death. But you would go back to that same day one 8 years from now, 9 years from now, 10 years from now. You'd have to start back over at day one if you slip up and if you relapse by not doing and practicing the things that you've been practicing and doing the things that you need to do to make sure that you stay sober. The same thing goes with injuries and niggles and rehab and PT, whatever. It's like once you get to where like you're performing perfectly or as close to perfect as you ever have been and you're pain free and you're totally healthy and you feel great. And I know it's hard because most of us are time crunching. Like the first things that are gonna go are always the stuff that's not the highlight. That's not swim bike run. It's going to be stretching. It's going to be foam rolling. It's going to be, PT. It's going to be whatever. It's going to be, those are going to go first for most people. But it's those details that allow you to swim, bike, run at your best. You just have to pay attention to it on the long haul. If that is something that's impeding your progress or causing you to be on the shelf a lot or causing you to be injured a ton, like you have to take a really hard look in the mirror and be like, all right, well, I can continue to have these ups and downs and these curves and these mountains and these valleys through my triathlon career or endurance sport career, whatever it is, or I can just trend up and be happy and be healthy and not keep getting injured and always be available. Because one of the things that we forget about is that through our availability to train, to our availability to swim and bike and run and get fitter and be faster, we're creating a body that can do more things. Because what also happens when you go on the shelf is you can do less in general. You can do and participate. You have to do less and participate less in life. You are impeded by a boot or crutches or a wheelchair or the ability to throw a ball with your kid or do, like those things matter, and yet we just throw them by the wayside like they're nothing or like they'll be just fine or I'll just take a week or two off and it'll just heal. You have to be if athletes would take the aggressive nature of research and determination and motivation and commitment to their training as they would keeping alive their ability to train via time management, being healthy, via PT, being rehab, or just being proactive in any kind of a niggle or a pain or a soreness. Like if they would take that same mentality to the other end of preventative maintenance or doing whatever it is, or just addressing an event or addressing a soreness, like they would find that they would continue to trend up because a couple of runs here or there isn't going to matter. What might matter is 6 or 8 months. And it's just something that we have to, I think, to look at and be very, very aware of. And again, it's not the most like fun highlighting. I'm sure this is like bored people to tears, but it's something you need to know. Like if you want to be successful in the sport and not continually go from being hurt to being injured, always being that athlete who always has that as their excuse, that I wasn't able to prepare well today, or my race didn't go as planned, or not bad after 8 weeks off, or not bad after a year off. Like it could just be this was my best day because I've been training year round for the last 3 years and I've been totally healthy the entire time. That's how it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be no pain, no gain, or ER or PR, whatever it is. It's like you need to be healthy. You need to be able to do these things because you don't need us to be around for your triathlon life. You need to be set and ready to roll in your personal human life.
Well, I can tell you why it should be exciting, even though it may not seem like it. But like when people get injured and when they're down, like I've just been going through, it's like a reminder too. Like, okay, you should be grateful, man. And that's what is giving me excitement because when you're in the throes of an injury, a nagging chronic problem, whether it's mental or physical or whatever it is, the hope that you get when you see improvement is like, oh, it's like a rebirth or something. It's like, oh man, I got another shot at it, right? And I love what you said about the analogy with the AA, the recovery, and it's almost like, and I think you've said this, it's sort of like when you're feeling like you don't need a meeting at all, that's probably when you might need it the most. So it's like if you're cruising along and you're like, man, I don't need those rehab things anymore, that's probably when you should probably get in there, because that's going to keep you solid, because anything can happen. We've seen it, the mood of a race, your mood can change 180 in about 2 minutes. So like, don't ever trust that. Don't ever trust that feeling that you're healed, that you're healthy. I mean, keep working at things that make you feel good and feel better in the long run, because that's the best defense mechanism. It's always about preventative than reacting.
Amen. Way to
Amen.
bring it home for us today. Way to bring it home for us today.
Yeah, we brought it home.
We brought it home. As usual, hey, we appreciate you tuning in. It has been a good podcast. I enjoyed that conversation, although probably boring to some, vital for others. And that's kind of what we do. We appreciate you again, you tuning in, giving us your time. We know you have a load of options out there in the triathlon podcast world. That's what we like to cover it all, triathlon and life. We hope you took something positive away from today's podcast and you can apply it to your own daily life that allows you to be a happier, healthier version of yourself. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or the like, you can always email Mike, crushingiron@gmail.com, or you can always get a hold of me, c26coach@gmail.com. And if you want more info on all things we do, our one-stop shop is c26triathlon.com. Camps, community, coaching, pictures of Mike's dog, you name it, we got it.
You name it, we got it. And stay tuned, because we're going to be having a lot of new stuff going on.
Oh, you've already starting to tease some out for our team, but yeah, it's going to be good stuff.
Good stuff. We're moving into the hub soon. The Southeast's most incredible triathlon training center. We're still looking for a...
I'll let you work on the tagline, yeah.
Anyway, it's coming. We'll give you more soon.
Thanks
for listening. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll see you Thursday.
All right, buddy. See you.